The after-action report begins the way they all do, with a timestamp, a unit designation, and a list of names. 6 names in this case. By the time the report was filed, only the data survived. This is what the data says. First Class Marin Volkov had been in the U.S. Expeditionary Corps for 11 years when she was selected for the Callaway mission, and in those 11 years, she had learned exactly one thing that mattered. The universe does not care about your plans. It will eat your timeline, digest your contingencies, and pass your carefully laminated briefing documents into the void without a second thought. What it cannot eat, what it has never, in 11 years, managed to consume, is the particular stubbornness of a person who has decided they are not finished yet. She was thinking about that stubbornness on the morning they left lunar orbit, watching the Earth shrink in the observation port until it was small enough to cover with her thumb. She did not cover it. She had seen people do that in recruitment vids, and it always struck her as theatrical. Instead, she pressed her forehead against the cold polycarbonate and looked at it straight until her eyes watered, 'cause she wanted to remember it exactly as it was. A smear of blue and white, impossibly fragile, achingly alive. Then she turned around and went back to work. The Galloway was not a warship. That distinction mattered back then. The UAS had been careful about it, deliberate in a way that later historians would describe as either admirable restraint or catastrophic naivety, depending on their politics. The mission was scientific. The crew was 6. Volkov, commanding. Lieutenant Commander Dao Jinhai, pilot and systems engineer. Dr. Priya Venkataraman, xenobiologist. Corporal Felix Osi, medic and EVA specialist. Dr. Lena Stroud, geophysicist. And Warrant Officer Tomas Reyes, communications and electronic warfare. 11 months. That was the transit time. 11 months in a ship the size of a large apartment, breathing recycled air and eating food that tasted like the memory of food, rotating through sleep schedules and exercise rotations and the slow, grinding maintenance work that kept them alive. They played cards. They argued about music. Venkataraman taught everyone a card game she'd learned from her grandmother, that nobody else could ever fully remember the two. Osi kept a photograph of his daughters taped above his bunk, not on a screen, actual paper, before departure, and touched the edge of it every morning before he got up, a gesture so private and so consistent that the rest of the crew pretended not to notice it. Reyes, who noticed everything, noticed. He did not mention it. He was like that. A man who collected observations the way other people collected grievances, storing them somewhere interior and warm, taking them out occasionally to examine them in private. He had grown up in a city where paying too much attention to what you'd seen was the quickest route to getting hurt. And the habit had followed him into the Corps and then into space, where it made him exceptionally good at his job and occasionally difficult to read. He was the first one to notice that the signal had changed. The Yari had been broadcasting for approximately 6,000 years by the time humanity developed the instruments to hear them. This is what the post-mission analysts concluded, working backward from the signal characteristics, the decay patterns, the modulation signatures that Dr. Venkataraman had spent 3 years learning to parse before the mission launched. 6,000 years. A signal old enough that the civilization that sent it might not exist anymore in any form that would recognize itself. This was not, it turned out, the case. The signal's origin point was a moon. Not the moon, not Luna, humanity's first and most jealously guarded satellite, but a moon of the 4th gas giant in the Kepler 442 system, a body of ice and rock and subsurface ocean that humanity had named, with characteristic practicality, Kepler 442 ED3, and that the Yari called something that the translation matrices rendered, imperfectly, as the Patience. The name would prove apt. The Galloway dropped out of FTL approximately 2 astronomical units from the moon, which was standard protocol. Hang back, observe, take readings, make no sudden movements. Volkov had read every first contact doctrine the Corps had produced in the past 40 years. All 12 volumes of them, and the consistent advice across all 12 volumes was, go slow, go careful, and for the love of everything holy do not project. They observed for 19 days. The moon was extraordinary, even at distance. The subsurface ocean generated enough thermal activity to show up clearly on passive sensors, and Stroud spent most of those 19 days in a state of barely contained rapture, muttering equations and running models, and occasionally emerging from her data cave to announce that the ocean was deeper than anything they'd theorized, that the chemistry was startlingly Earth-adjacent, that she needed 6 more years and a bigger boat. On the 20th day, the Yari noticed them. This is what the after-action report says about first contact, 0347 ship time. Communications panel shows anomalous carrier wave on a frequency outside the range of the passive array. Reyes is awake. He sleeps badly, always has, and he catches it before the automated systems flag it. He runs 3 verification passes, each one more thorough than the last, because he is a man who does not announce things until he is certain. Then he goes and wakes Volkov. She comes to the communications bay in her socks, hair loose, coffee mug in hand, because she stopped at the galley out of sheer muscle memory. She listens to what Reyes plays her. She sets down the coffee mug. She picks it back up. She drinks from it slowly, looking at the waveform display with an expression that the bay's camera records, but that is difficult to categorize. "That's them," she says. "Yeah," says Reyes. They stand there for a moment, the two of them, in the dark and quiet of the communications bay, with the ship's ventilation humming around them, and the universe pressing in from outside, and the signal cycling through its pattern again. Patient as the name of the moon it came from. "Wake everyone else," Volkov says. The Hari were not what the briefing documents had prepared them for. No briefing document could have prepared them for the Hari, and Volkov would say so, bluntly. In every debrief and hearing and academic symposium, she was compelled to attend for the rest of her life. The xenolinguistics team had reconstructed the signal data, rough body plan, bilateral symmetry, distributed nervous system, something that might be eyes, something that might be manipulator limbs. Standard issue alien, in other words. The kind that fit in a human brain's available categories. The Yahari did not fit. They were large. The smallest adult specimen observed was approximately 4 meters from appendage tip to appendage tip. And they moved through their environment with a fluid, multi-directional grace that registered as deeply wrong to human visual processing, the way a word looks wrong if you stare at it long enough. They communicated via bioluminescence, via subsonic vibration, via a pheromonic chemistry that the Galloway's sensors could detect but not decode. They were, by every measure the crew could apply, intelligent, demonstrably, frighteningly so, but their intelligence was organized differently. Not better or worse, just differently, like a sentence in a language you've heard spoken but never learned to read, where you can feel the structure without accessing the meaning. Dr. Venkataraman described them, in her official report, as organized around principles of distributed cognition and collective memory that have no precise analog in human neural architecture. In her private log, which she released to the public a decade later, she described them as the most beautiful and terrifying thing I have ever seen, and I grew up in Chennai during the monsoon, so that is saying something. First contact lasted 9 days. 9 days of the Galloway's translation matrices working at maximum capacity, Venkataraman and Reyes, and the ship's AI, building a shared vocabulary from signal patterns and mathematical constants and the kinds of concepts so fundamental that any intelligence sophisticated enough to broadcast them would have to share them. 9 days of painfully slow, achingly careful communication, of misunderstandings and corrections, and the particular vertigo of realizing that a thing you have assumed universal, time, causality, the meaning of a question, is actually a cultural artifact. On the 9th day, the Hari asked them to leave. The exact phrasing, as reconstructed by the translation matrices, was, "Carry inside you something that will not coexist with us. We have seen this before. We are sorry." Volkov sat with that translation for a long time. She sat with it the way you sit with a diagnosis that confirms something you've been pretending you didn't know. The Yari had been here for 6,000 years, broadcasting their signal, and in 6,000 years they had apparently had this conversation before. Not with humans, but with something. Some other species that had come, carrying whatever it was they carried, whatever quality or tendency or viral potential the Hari had identified in the Galloway's crew and found incompatible. She asked through the translation matrices what they had done, those previous visitors. who had not been asked to leave in time. The Hari's response took 14 hours to arrive. When it came, it was a single pattern, repeated 3 times, that the matrices translated as, "Shh." They stayed. Volkov called her crew together in the common area and told them what had been said. All of it. The translation, the implication, the instruction. She watched their faces as she talked. Jinhai's careful neutrality, Stroud's visible distress, Osi's quiet attention, Venkataraman's expression of someone running calculations faster than she can process the results. Looking at his hands the way he did when he was working something out. "So, they're asking us to go home," Osi said. "They're asking us to go home," Volkov confirmed. "And if we don't?" Nobody answered that. They didn't need to. The word, "Shh." They stayed. Hung in the recycled air of the common room, carrying its weight. Stroud said, "We've been here 9 days. The science we have, the data alone is worth." "I know," Volkov said. "If we leave now, it'll be 11 months back, and then what? Debrief. Review. Another mission? We could be 40 years out from returning. The treaty protocols alone." "Lena, I know." Stroud stopped, pressed her lips together, nodded. "We do what they ask," Volkov said. "We prep departure, we go home." And they would have. She would say this for the rest of her life, in every debrief and hearing, and she would mean it. They would have gone. They had prepared for departure. They had run the exit calculations and filed the trajectory, and Jinhai had been running pre-burn checks when the Hari came to them. And it was emphatically not the humans who broke the agreement. What broke the agreement was Kepler 442 Edna 3 itself. Or rather, what was inside it. Stroud found it in her data during the departure prep. A thermal anomaly in the subsurface readings, a pattern in the ocean chemistry that she had flagged as unusual, and then set aside in favor of the first contact excitement, and that she came back to now in the strange calm of pre-departure, and stared at for 6 hours until she had to accept what she was seeing. The ocean was not empty. It was not the Yari. The Hari lived on the moon's surface, in structures grown from the ice itself, communities that spread across the frozen terrain like living frost. What was in the ocean was something else, something the Yari had either not mentioned, or had assumed, was too obvious to mention. Something that the Galloway's passive sensors, pointed primarily at the surface and the signal sources, had missed entirely. Something that noticed the ship's active sensor sweep the moment Stroud ran it. The collision alarm sounded 0.4 seconds later. What they hit, or rather, what hit them, was not a weapon, exactly. The post-match analysis would spend years on this point. It was more like a response, a focused burst of electromagnetic energy from a source somewhere in the moon's ocean, channeled through the ice with a precision that suggested either extraordinary technology or extraordinary biology, or, most likely, both. It hit the Galloway's propulsion array like a key turning in a lock, and suddenly the ship had no maneuvering thrust and a decaying orbit, and approximately 6 hours before it made unplanned contact with the moon's surface. Jinhai had the situation report up in 40 seconds. He was like that. A pilot who operated in crisis the way other people operated in comfort, with a kind of calm so thorough it sometimes read as coldness, though it wasn't. He had been flying since he was 17, had logged more hours in more classes of craft than anyone else on the ship, and the particular quality he brought to an emergency was not fearlessness. He felt the fear, but an absolute refusal to let the fear make any decisions. "Propulsion is gone," he said. "I can use attitude thrusters to manage our descent, maybe slow it, but we're going down." "Options," Volkov said. "Land it or abandon ship. The lifeboats would survive, I don't know. The same thing that hit us might hit them too." He paused. "I can land it. I've set down worse rigs in worse conditions. I'm not saying it'll be pretty." Volkov looked at him. He looked back at her. 11 months in a ship together, and she could read him well enough to know that he, not pretty, was doing significant work in that sentence. "Do it," she said. "Then everyone needs to strap in, and I mean now, and I mean tight, and I mean..." The second pulse hit. Felix Osi was the one who went outside. This is the part of the report that gets the most attention, in the hearings and the retrospectives and the documentary reconstructions. This is the part that people argue about, that ethicists write papers about, that military historians use as a case study, in unit cohesion and individual decision-making under extreme stress. This is, in other words, the part that gets discussed. What gets discussed less is why he did it, not the tactical reason, which was clear enough from the footage, but the human reason, the reason that the official report doesn't have a field for. He did it because it was Lena. The second pulse had done something to the communications array, specifically to the transceiver housing on the hull exterior, which had taken the brunt of the EM burst and was now actively interfering with Jinhai's attempts to use the attitude thrusters. It needed to be bypassed. It needed to be bypassed from outside, and the only person outside in the chaos of the second pulse's aftermath, Stroud, who had gone to the forward observation dome to take direct sensor readings, and had been thrown by the ship's and had grabbed the emergency handhold and was currently attached to the hull by that handhold and about 6 meters of safety tether, kilometers above the moon's ice surface, with a malfunctioning helmet seal that was bleeding atmosphere at a rate that gave her about 22 minutes of breathable air. 22 minutes. The suit's telemetry was right there on OC's screen, clear as a diagnosis. Suiting up before Fulcoff finished processing what the telemetry meant. OC, seal issue and array bypass, he said. I can do both. The source of those pulses, gone. Then I do it fast. He was already in the EVA suit. He had done this before, not this exactly. The general shape of it. Go outside, fix the thing, come back, act as if it wasn't as bad as it was. He had daughters. He had a photograph of his daughters above his bunk. He had, more than anything, quality that the Corps' psychological assessment had noted but struggled to classify. A kind of settled certainty. Beneath all the normal fear, the people in his care were worth more than the risk he was accepting. He was outside in 4 minutes. The moon was stunning from up here, he would note later in his personal log, assuming, against the evidence, that he'd be in a position to write personal logs. The ice caught Jupiter's reflected light and scattered it in prismatic bands, blue, white, and gold, and the planet itself filled a third of the sky, banded and vast and utterly indifferent, beautiful the way wilderness is beautiful, by having no opinion of you whatsoever. He reached Stroud in 90 seconds. He sealed her helmet manually, the spare cartridge he'd grabbed on the way out fitting into the housing with a... He felt in his gloves but couldn't hear. She was shaking. Adrenaline, he noted clinically, not cold. Suit's thermal systems are still functioning. He tapped her visor twice with his finger. The crew's wordless signal for... Okay. She tapped back once. Okay. Not okay, not even close to okay, but alive and functioning and capable of the next thing. Get back to the airlock, he told her over the suit comm. The array, I've got the go, she went. The bypass took him 7 minutes. He had the tools. He had the schematics loaded in his helmet display. He had the particular focused calm that comes from knowing exactly what the task is and knowing that nothing else matters until the task is done. The stars wheeled overhead as the ship continued its slow, graceless rotation, and the moon filled more and more of his peripheral vision. And somewhere below the ice, something vast was breathing. He was 2/3 of the way through the bypass when the third pulse came. It didn't hit the ship this time. It hit him. The medical analysis, completed much later, determined that the pulse that struck OC's suit had disrupted the propulsion system of the EVA unit, the small gas jets that allowed a suited crew member to maneuver outside the ship. Not life-threatening in itself. He had his tether. But the tether's magnetic clamp, rated for a certain range of electromagnetic interference, was not rated for what the Ahari's ocean companion was producing. The clamp failed at 0. 7 seconds after the pulse, the EVA unit was already firing as a damage control reflex, pushing him away from the hull. He had approximately 4 seconds before the tether reached its full extension and either held or didn't. Volkov, watching from inside, watching the telemetry spike and the camera footage, and OC's vital signs climbing toward crisis, understood what those 4 seconds contained before they were over. She understood it the way you understand a chess position, 3 moves before the endgame, completely, uselessly, in a way that changed nothing. OC understood it too. He had 4 seconds, and what he did with them was, he reached back, found the tether release. The voluntary release. the one that required deliberate manual operation, that could not be triggered by accident. And he held his hand over it, while his EVA unit continued to push him away from the hull. He held it there while the tether went taut. The clamp failed. The tether went slack. He was already moving, not the direction the EVA thrust was taking him. He had, in those 4 seconds, used the thrust in a different direction entirely. Not away from the ship, but parallel to it, close enough to the hull that when the tether failed, he was near enough to the secondary handhold array to grab. He grabbed. The impact of his momentum against the handhold ripped 3 of his fingers inside the glove. He would find this out later. In the moment, he noted only that he had stopped moving away from the ship, cataloged that information as relevant, and went back to the bypass. He finished it in 4 more minutes. His hands were shaking badly enough that the last 2 connections took 3 attempts each. Array bypassed, he reported. I'm coming in. Confirmed, Jinhai said, and the attitude thrusters fired, and the Galloway's dying spiral began, incrementally. Correct. They landed hard. Jinhai would say, later, that he landed it soft. He would say this with a straight face in every debrief for the next 3 years. And nobody who had seen the footage would quite have the heart to correct him, because what he had actually done, bringing a critically damaged spacecraft down onto an ice moon with no propulsion, using only attitude thrusters, and what the accident investigators would describe as a level of intuitive systems knowledge that borders on inexplicable, was close enough to a miracle that calling it a hard landing felt petty. 1 thruster housing was destroyed on impact. The landing gear deployed unevenly. The ship came to rest at a 17-degree list, approximately 6 seconds. Nobody moved or spoke while the hull made the sounds that hulls make when they've done something they were not designed to do. Then Volkov said, report. 1 by 1 they reported, alive, shaken. OC had broken fingers, and a cracked rib he didn't mention, until the medic's automated checklist caught it. Stroud had a bruised shoulder, and the particular look of someone who has very recently not died, and is still processing what that means. Functional. Good, Volkov said. Jinhai, what have we got? We're stable, life support intact. Hull integrity holding. I've got 4 microfractures flagged, but they're stable. Nothing immediate. Propulsion is gone. We're not flying anywhere. Communications? Reyes answered that one. The bypass OC ran gives me something to work with. Ship to ship is gone, the main array is wrecked. I think I can get signal to the relay buoy we left in high orbit. It'll be tight. How tight? Maybe 15% bandwidth. Compressed data. Prioritized. I can get our records out. Everything we've collected, he paused. But not a rescue call. Not enough bandwidth for a real-time 2-way. Volkov absorbed this. How long to prep the data package? Depends what you want in it. Everything. I want everything we have. Sensor logs. Translation work. Venkataraman's analysis. Ship footage. She stopped. Ozzy's EVA footage. That'll take bandwidth. I know. Find the bandwidth. Outside, the moon was silent. Venkataraman was the one who wanted to go out. She was, in some ways, the one who had always been going to go out. The xenobiologist, 3.5 years into a mission to find alien life, sitting in a crashed spacecraft on top of an ocean full of something she had not yet identified. The situation had a kind of terrible logic to it. Completion. Absolutely not, Volkov said. The readings I can get from out there, we're dealing with something that shot us out of the sky, twice, and may have a 3rd shot loaded. Nobody leaves the ship. The shots came from the ocean. The surface is still the top of the ocean. Priya. Kaf looked at her. No. Venkataraman sat with that for a moment, then she nodded once. The way you nod, when you understand the reasoning and intend to return to the argument at a more opportune moment. She did not return to it at a more opportune moment. She did something else instead. She kept working. She had the passive sensor array, which was functioning. She had the data she'd already collected. She had 11 months of background readings and 9 days of first contact signal analysis, and a brain that had been trained to find pattern and meaning in the products of non-human intelligence. She sat at her station in the tilted ship, with a cup of coffee going cold beside her, and she worked, steady and methodical, the way she had worked every day of the mission. 3 hours after landing, she called Reyes over. Look at this. He looked. He was quiet for a long time. Is that what I think it is? The first contact signal, she said. The one we've been parsing for 9 days. Look at the deep structure. Not the carrier, not the surface message, the embedded pattern underneath. The embedded pattern was a question, or something that in the translation matrice's best approximation corresponded to a question. A very specific question, asked in a language that had been broadcasting for 6,000 years, embedded beneath a message that said, "Go away." Asking, with a patience that was nearly geological, "Are you the kind that stays, or the kind that learns?" The Yari had asked this question of every species that had ever found the signal. This was what the 6,000-year record in the deep structure showed, if you knew how to read it. Some had left without answering. Some had stayed, and the translation matrices struggled here, but Venkataraman's best reading was remained. Become something else, or stopped becoming anything. And a very few, a number small enough to count without removing your shoes, had answered the question, had found the language for it, had sent something back that the Hari had read and understood and filed in their 6,000-year archive of everything that was not them. "Can we answer it?" Reyes asked. "I think so. I think that's the point. I think the question has been there the whole time. And the test isn't whether we can leave when asked. The test is whether we can find the question and answer it how." Venkataraman was quiet for a moment. "Honestly," she said, "that's my best guess. Whatever we are, we answer it honestly." This is what Reyes sent. He compiled the data package that Volkov had requested. Every record, every sensor log, every translation file, every moment of the 9 days of first contact rendered in their most complete and honest form. The EVIA footage, the crash footage, the internal cameras showing 6 human beings processing fear, making decisions, helping each other, being afraid. The photograph of Osi's daughters, which the internal camera had captured in sufficient resolution to transmit. The untranslated argument that Stroud and Venkataraman had on day 4, which had seemed embarrassing at the time, and which now Reyes included because it was true, because it was them, because whatever answer they were sending had to be true. He compressed it down to fit the 15% bandwidth. Treat. He built it around Venkataraman's translation of the embedded question. Are you the kind that stays, or the kind that learns? The answer he wrapped around everything else was not text, it was the footage itself. The mission in its entirety, the 11 months of travel, the 9 days of communication, the crash, the decisions, the fear, the stubbornness, the moment Osi's hand closed on the handhold, the photograph, cold coffee. The card game nobody could remember the rules to. He sent it. Then he went and told Volkov what he'd done. She listened without interrupting. When he was finished, she was quiet for a long moment, looking at the tilted horizon through the observation port, where the ice stretched out in bands of color under Jupiter's impossible light. "Good," she said finally. "You're not angry." "Why would I be angry?" He didn't answer that. She wasn't, he could see. She was something more complicated than angry. Something in the register of grief and pride and the particular weight of a decision that has already been made by the situation itself, leaving you only the choice of how you stand when it's over. "How long until we know if it reached the buoy?" she asked. "Already confirmed it's in the relay queue. And Earth? 11 months. Roughly." She nodded. 11 months for the data to travel, and then however long for someone to read it, and then however long for someone to build a ship and figure out how to come get them. And in the meantime, crashed spacecraft on an ice moon with functional life support and intact food stores, and enough power to keep everyone alive for approximately 3 years. 3 years, possible. "Okay," she said, "so we wait." The Yari came on the 3rd day. Not to the ship. They didn't approach the ship. They came to the ice about 200 meters out, and they were not what any of them had expected, which was characteristic of every encounter with the Hari from the beginning. On the surface, outside their structures, they moved differently than they had on the sensors. Slower, more deliberate. They seemed to be. Venkataraman spent hours watching the footage trying to find the right word. Considering. Their bioluminescence was extraordinary. Bands of color moved through their bodies in patterns that the translation matrices read as language but also as something else, something that predated or exceeded language. the way music contains meaning that words cannot. Standing at the observation port, watching two of them cross the ice in the Jovian dawn, Stroud made a sound that was not quite crying. Something quieter. Something that Reyes, who was standing next to her, understood immediately. He had felt it too. The shock of beauty coming at exactly the wrong moment, which is somehow always the best moment. Venkataraman was already at the communications console. She was composing a reply to the embedded question. Not with the data package Reyes had sent, but with something small, something she had been working on for 2 days. A single mathematical sequence, expressed in the Hari's own signal language, that said something which the matrices rendered as, "We know we are not finished learning. We are the kind that does not stop." She sent it. The Hari on the ice stopped. They turned toward the ship, both of them in unison, and the bioluminescence changed. The pattern shifted into something the matrices couldn't fully parse, something in a register beyond their current vocabulary, but the emotional valence was legible. The matrices flagged it as. Now, Volkov had been watching from the command seat. She stood up slowly. She walked to the observation port and stood next to Stroud and looked out at two Yari on the ice, two creatures who had watched species come and go across 6,000 years of waiting, who had learned to recognize the difference between the ones who stayed in the bad sense and the ones who stayed in the good sense, and who were now doing something with their bioluminescence that looked, allowing for the vast differences in biology and cognition and the fundamental strangeness of everything about them, like welcome. Well, Volkov said, to no one in particular. She was thinking of the Earth, small enough to cover with her thumb, impossibly fragile, achingly alive. She was thinking of OC's photograph, which was now somewhere in the relay queue, traveling through the dark toward home. She was thinking of Venkataraman's grandmother's card game, whose rules she still couldn't quite remember. "Okay," she said. "Let's get to work." The rescue mission arrived 27 months later. They found the Galloway still on the ice, still at its 17-degree list, its hull worn and patched and covered in what the rescue crew's geophysicist identified as a Yari-derived biological sealant, applied from outside by hands, by appendages that had filled the microfractures the impact had caused. The life support was running. The food stores were depleted to the backup reserves. The communications array had been substantially rebuilt, incorporating components of Hari design that would take human engineers 4 years to fully reverse engineer. All 6 crew members were alive. They were sitting in the common area when the rescue team came through the airlock. Volkov was dealing cards. OC's fingers had healed, mostly. Venkataraman was writing something. She was always writing something by then, had been for months. The first xenolinguistic grammar of the Hari language. The foundational text of a field that would consume the next generation of human science. Stroud had maps spread across the table, physical maps she'd drawn herself, the ocean floor, as the Hari had helped them understand it, a world within a world. Jinhai was asleep, his head tilted back against the bulkhead, the particular boneless sleep of someone who has stopped carrying something heavy. Reyes was doing something with a piece of wire and a very small tool, an old habit. His hands always needed to be doing something. The rescue crew commander said, "Surgeon First Class Volkov?" Volkov looked up from the cards. "That's me. Commander Eliza Hatch, SCV Meridian. We are frankly very glad to see you. Likewise." Volkov set down the cards. "There's coffee if you want it. It's not great coffee. Could not care less about the quality. Then sit down." Volkov gestured at the tilted chairs, the worn table, the spread of maps and translation notes, and a single creased photograph of 2 girls who were now 27 months older than they'd been in. Picture. "We have a lot to tell you. The after-action report, filed 19 months after the rescue, is 847 pages. It covers the mission profile, the first contact protocols, the tactical decisions in the crash sequence, the EVA incident in technical detail, sufficient to fill 16 appendices. It covers the Yari in the preliminary and incomplete way that anything which is still actively ongoing can be covered. It covers the ocean entity, which the scientific community would spend decades debating whether to classify as a single organism or a distributed system or something that resisted both categories. In 3 pages of frank admission that further study was required. The report's final section is a summary of outcomes. It lists the scientific achievements first, in order of significance, list that runs for 11 pages. Lists these personnel outcomes second, 6 crew members, all surviving, with noted injuries and decorations and subsequent assignments. The last line of the report, under a section heading labeled Other Outcomes, reads as follows. The Yahari have indicated, through mechanisms detailed in Appendix F, their willingness to continue contact. They have asked, through Dr. Venkataraman's ongoing translationist work, that the relevant authorities be informed of the following. They have been waiting. They have watched other species choose. They had begun, over the long interval of their watching, to develop a hypothesis about which qualities distinguish the kinds that learned from the kinds that did not. They would like to revise their hypothesis. The revised hypothesis includes stubbornness. In the photograph above Felix Ossi's bunk, now in its permanent home in a frame on a shelf in the house where his daughters grew up, 2 girls squint into a summer afternoon. He took the photograph before he left. He printed it before he left, because he wanted something real, something that could not be digitally corrupted or power cycled into nothing, something that was just paper and light, and the 2 of them exactly as they were, on a particular Tuesday in July. He carried it 11 months to a moon that should not have been able to support life. He carried it through a crash and an EVA that broke 3 fingers and a rib. He brought it home. This is the thing about humans, the Yari would note, much later, in a communication that took Dr. Venkataraman's team the better part of a year to fully translate. They carry their reasons with them. They carry them in their pockets, in their hands, in the photographs above their bunks. They go very far into the dark with their reasons, and when the dark does something unexpected, they use the reasons to find their way back. This is what the data says. This is where the record ends. The signal is still broadcasting.